The war had lasted 12 years, and Master Sergeant Elias Cole was tired in a way that sleep could never fix. He stood in the great hall of the Velithari homeworld, and watched as generals and admirals celebrated their victory with drinks and laughter and speeches about human triumph. But all he could think about were the friends who would never see this day. The Velithari dominion had fallen, and humanity had won. Yet Elias felt no joy as he looked around the conquered palace, with its purple crystal walls and strange floating lights. He had killed too many and lost too many to feel anything but a hollow ache in his chest. He was 42 years old, and his body carried the scars of 100 battles. A plasma burn ran down his left arm, and shrapnel had taken 2 fingers from his right hand. And somewhere deep inside him was a wound that no medic could ever heal. "Sergeant Cole," a voice called out, and he turned to see Admiral Chen approaching with a smile that made him uncomfortable. "You are a hero of the Terran Alliance, and today you will receive a special honor." Elias did not want any more honors. He had medals enough to fill a box, and each one reminded him of blood and screaming and the faces of young soldiers who trusted him to keep them alive. "With respect, Admiral," Elias said, "I would prefer to skip the ceremony and return home." Admiral Chen laughed as if he had told a joke and placed a hand on his shoulder with a grip that felt more like a command than a gesture of friendship. "Nonsense," the Admiral said. "The Velithari have surrendered under their ancient laws, and those laws require them to offer their noble caste as tribute to the victors. You are one of our most decorated soldiers, and you have been assigned a prize of great value." The word prize made something twist in his stomach, and Elias shook his head slowly. "I do not want a prize," he said, "especially not a person." "It is not a request," Admiral Chen replied, and his smile faded just enough to show the steel beneath. "This is diplomacy. If we reject their customs, we insult them and risk reigniting the war. You will accept this tribute, and you will treat it as the honor it represents." Before Elias could argue further, the great doors of the hall opened, and a procession of Velithari guards entered. They wore armor of black metal, and their faces were hidden behind masks that showed no emotion. And between them walked a figure in chains. She was tall, nearly 7 feet, with skin the color of deep violet, and silver eyes that caught the light like mirrors. Her hair was white as snow and cut short in the military style, and her face carried the sharp angles and high cheekbones that marked Velithari nobility. She wore simple gray robes, and her wrists were bound with golden chains that glowed with some kind of energy. But what struck Elias most were the marks on her skin. Burned into her arms and neck were symbols that he did not recognize, and they looked fresh and painful. "May I present Caliph Vorsan," announced a Velithari official in heavily accented English, "former high strategist of the Third Fleet. She is now the property of the human called Elias Cole, as payment for his valor in battle." The hall went quiet, and Elias felt every eye turned toward him. He knew that name, and his blood ran cold at the sound of it. Caliph Vorsan, the butcher of Europa, the strategist who had designed the siege that killed half his unit and left him trapped in a frozen bunker for 3 weeks, with nothing but the bodies of his friends for company. He stared at her, and she stared back, and in her silver eyes he saw no fear, no hatred, no plea for mercy. There was only a cold emptiness that reminded him of his own reflection in the mirror each morning. "This is a joke," Elias said, but no one laughed. The Velithari guards pushed Caliph forward until she stood directly before him, and then they forced her to her knees. She went down without resistance, her head bowed, her chained hands resting on her thighs. "She is yours," the official said, "to do with as you wish. This is the way of Valkorath, the binding of defeat." Elias looked down at this woman who had caused him so much pain, and he waited for the hatred to rise up and consume him. He waited for the desire for revenge to fill his heart and guide his hand, but it never came. All he saw was a prisoner in chains, and he had seen too many prisoners in too many wars to take any pleasure in the sight. "Get up," he said quietly. Caliph did not move, and the Velithari official stepped forward with concern on his face. "She must remain in submission until you acknowledge your ownership," the official explained. "It is the custom." "I said get up," Elias repeated, and this time his voice carried the command tone that had led men through fire and death. Caliph raised her head slowly and looked at him with those silver eyes, searching his face for something she did not seem to find. Then she rose to her feet with a grace that seemed impossible for someone in chains. Elias turned to Admiral Chen with anger burning in his chest. "Give me transport back to Earth," he said, "and give me the codes to remove these chains. I am taking her with me, but not as a slave." The Admiral frowned, but nodded slowly. Perhaps he saw something in Elias that warned him not to argue. 3 hours later, Elias sat in a small transport ship as it lifted off from the Velithari homeworld, and across from him sat Caliph with her hands still bound and her eyes still empty. They were alone now, far from the generals and the ceremonies and the politics. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the device that controlled her chains, and without a word he pressed the release. The golden bands fell from her wrists and clattered to the floor, and Caliph stared at them as if she could not understand what had happened. "I do not own people," Elias said simply. "You are free to go. When we reach Earth, I will arrange transport for you to wherever you want." She did not respond for a long moment, and when she finally spoke her voice was low and rough, as if she had not used it in a long time. "You cannot do this," she said. "I just did," Elias replied. "No," Caliph said, and for the first time something flickered in her silver eyes, something that might have been fear. "You do not understand. You defeated me in war, and by my laws your victory bound my soul to yours. The Valkorath is not just tradition, it is sacred." She held up her arms and showed him the burn marks on her skin. "These are shame brands," she continued. "They mark me as conquered. My people have cast me out, and my ancestors will not receive my spirit when I die. You are all I have now, and if you reject me, then I am nothing." Elias had faced enemies with guns and blades and bombs, but he had never faced anything like this. The weight of her words pressed down on him, and he did not know how to carry it. "I cannot be your owner," he said carefully. "Then I am dead," Caliph replied, and she said it with such calm certainty that he knew she meant it. The transport ship hummed around them as it carried them toward Earth, and Elias looked at this woman who had been his enemy and wondered what he was supposed to do with her now. He had expected hatred and defiance, not this strange, desperate need that seemed to terrify her as much as it confused him. "What do you want from me?" he asked finally. Caliph met his eyes, and in her gaze he saw something that surprised him. Beneath the cold surface there was pain, deep and old and familiar. "I do not know," she admitted. "No conqueror has ever asked me that before." Elias leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes, and he thought about all the ways this could go wrong. But he had survived 12 years of war by trusting his instincts, and his instincts told him that this woman was not his enemy anymore. "All right," he said slowly. "I will not send you away, but I will not own you either. We will figure out something else, something that does not make either of us into monsters." Caliph stared at him, as if he had spoken in a language she had never heard, and perhaps in a way he had. Perhaps kindness was a language the Velithari had forgotten long ago. "Why?" she asked, and the question seemed to cost her something precious. Elias opened his eyes and looked at her, this tall violet woman with her silver eyes and her shame brands and her ancient laws. "Because the war is over," he said, "and I am tired of being someone I hate." The transport ship flew on through the darkness of space, carrying two broken soldiers toward an uncertain future, and neither of them knew what waited for them on Earth. But for the first time in 12 years, Elias Cole felt something other than emptiness. He felt curiosity, and perhaps that was enough to start with. The ranch in Montana was small and old, with wooden walls and a roof that needed repair, and it sat alone in a valley surrounded by mountains that turned gold and red in the autumn light. Elias had bought it before the war, with dreams of raising horses and living a quiet life. But then the Velathari came, and those dreams had to wait for 12 long years. Now he was home at last, but he was not alone. Kalith stood in the doorway of the ranch house and stared at the mountains with an expression he could not read. She had been silent for most of the journey from the spaceport, watching everything with those silver eyes that seemed to record every detail. "This is where you live," she said, and it was not quite a question. "This is where I want to live," Elias replied, as he carried his bag inside. "I have not spent much time here. The war kept calling me back." The house was dusty and cold, and he spent the first hour turning on the heating system and checking that the water still worked. Kalith followed him from room to room like a shadow, and whenever he looked at her, she would lower her eyes as if waiting for an order. It made him uncomfortable in a way he could not explain. "You can sit down," he said, pointing to a chair in the kitchen. "You do not have to stand." Kalith looked at the chair as if it might be a trap, then slowly sat on the edge of it, with her back straight and her hands folded in her lap. She looked like a soldier waiting for inspection, not a guest in someone's home. Elias sighed and started making coffee, and as the machine hummed to life, he tried to think of what to say. He had commanded hundreds of soldiers and negotiated with generals and politicians, but he had no idea how to talk to this woman. "Are you hungry?" he asked. "I do not require food at this time," Kalith answered. "That is not what I asked," Elias said. "I asked if you are hungry." She paused, and he saw confusion flicker across her face. "I do not understand the difference," she admitted. Elias turned to look at her and felt something heavy settle in his chest. She truly did not understand, and that told him more about her life than any intelligence report ever could. "The difference," he said slowly, "is that I am not asking what you need to survive. I am asking what you want." Kalith was silent for a long moment, and when she spoke her voice was barely above a whisper. "I have not been asked what I want since I was a child." The coffee finished brewing, and Elias poured 2 cups, setting one in front of her. She looked at it with suspicion, then carefully lifted it to her lips and took a small sip. Her face twisted at the bitter taste, and he almost laughed. "You do not have to drink it if you do not like it," he said. "It is acceptable," she replied, though her expression said otherwise. Elias sat down across from her and wrapped his hands around his own cup, letting the warmth seep into his fingers. Outside the window, the sun was setting behind the mountains and painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. "We need to talk," he said, "about what happens now." Kalith straightened in her chair, and her expression became formal and distant. "I am prepared to fulfill whatever duties you require," she said. "I can clean, cook, maintain your home and property. I can also provide strategic counsel if you wish, though I understand if my advice is unwelcome given our history." "Stop," Elias said, holding up a hand. "Just stop. I do not want a servant, and I do not want a strategist. I want to understand what this Valkarath actually means so I can figure out how to handle it." She looked at him with those silver eyes, and for a moment he saw something crack in her perfect composure. "The Valkarath is sacred," she began. "When a Velathari warrior is defeated in honorable combat, their soul becomes bound to the victor. This is not metaphor or tradition, it is truth. I can feel it even now, a pull in my chest that points toward you like a compass pointing north." Elias frowned and shook his head. I do not believe in magic, he said. Neither do I, Kaleth replied, but I believe in what I feel, and what I feel is real. The Valkarath was created thousands of years ago during the war against our ancient enemy, the Kethvor. They were a hive mind species that enslaved our people and broke us down until we were nothing but tools for their use. She paused and looked down at her hands. When we finally rose up and defeated them, our greatest warriors created the Valkarath as a way to bind our society together. The strong would protect the weak, and the defeated would serve the victorious, and no one would ever be alone and vulnerable again. That sounds like slavery with extra steps, Elias said bluntly. Kaleth flinched as if he had struck her. It is not supposed to be, she said quietly. It is supposed to be partnership, protection, belonging. But over the centuries, it became twisted, and yes, it became something like slavery. The shame brands were never part of the original tradition. They were added later by those who wanted to punish rather than protect. She touched the burned marks on her arms, and her jaw tightened. My own people did this to me before they handed me over, she said. They wanted to make sure I would never forget my defeat. Elias felt anger rise in his chest, not at her, but at the people who had hurt her. He had seen torture and cruelty in the war, but there was something especially vicious about marking someone's skin with shame. I am sorry, he said, and he meant it. Kaleth looked up at him with surprise. You are sorry, she repeated. You are apologizing to me, the woman who designed the siege that killed your soldiers. Yes, Elias said simply. I do not understand you, she said, and there was frustration in her voice now. You should hate me. You should want revenge. Every other human I have met in the past weeks has looked at me with murder in their eyes. But you brought me to your home and gave me coffee, and now you apologize for my pain. Elias took a long sip of his coffee before answering. I did hate you, he admitted. For years I dreamed about finding you and making you pay for what happened at Europa. I kept a list of every soldier who died under your strategies, and I swore I would avenge them. He set down his cup and met her eyes. But then the war ended, and they gave you to me in chains, and you knelt at my feet like a broken thing, and all my hatred just drained away. I realized that revenge would not bring my friends back. It would only make me into someone they would not recognize. Kaleth stared at him for a long moment, and then something strange happened. Her silver eyes grew wet, and a single tear rolled down her violet cheek. I carry the dead too, she whispered. Every soldier who died following my orders. Every civilian caught in my strategies. Every enemy I destroyed. I remember all of them, and they haunt my sleep. Elias nodded slowly. I know, he said. I saw it in your eyes the first time I looked at you. That is why I could not hate you, because I recognized my own reflection. They sat in silence as the last light faded from the sky, and somewhere outside an owl called into the darkness. Two soldiers from opposite sides of a war, both carrying wounds that would never fully heal. Finally, Kaleth spoke again. What do we do now? She asked. Elias stood and gathered the coffee cups. Now, he said, I show you to your room, and we both try to sleep, and tomorrow we start figuring out how to live with each other. Not as master and slave, not as enemies, just as two people trying to survive. He led her to a small bedroom at the back of the house and opened the door. Inside was a simple bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out at the mountains. This is mine, Kaleth asked with disbelief in her voice. This is yours, Elias confirmed. You can lock the door from the inside, and no one will enter without your permission, not even me. She stepped into the room and looked around, as if she expected it to vanish at any moment. Then she turned to face him, and her expression was raw and vulnerable, in a way he had never seen before. You are not like any conqueror I have ever known, she said. Good, Elias replied, because I do not want to be a conqueror at all." He closed the door gently and walked to his own room, and as he lay in his bed, he thought about the strange path his life had taken. He had gone to war expecting to die, and instead, he had come home with an alien woman who needed him in ways he was only beginning to understand. Sleep came slowly that night, and when it did, the nightmares came with it. He was back on Europa, trapped in the frozen bunker, surrounded by the bodies of his friends. He screamed their names and clawed at the ice, and begged for someone to save him. He woke to find Kayla standing in his doorway, her silver eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. "You were screaming," she said. "I know," he gasped, his heart pounding in his chest. She hesitated, then spoke words that surprised them both. "You carry the dead," she said softly, "and so do I. Perhaps we can carry them together." Elias looked at this woman who had been his enemy, and saw something new in her face. Not cold strategy, not empty submission, but a fragile offer of connection. "Perhaps we can," he said. She nodded once and returned to her room, and Elias lay back down and stared at the ceiling. He did not know what the future held, but for the first time since the war ended, he did not feel quite so alone. 3 months passed, and the ranch slowly came to life under their care. Elias fixed the roof and painted the walls, while Caliph learned to tend the garden and care for the 2 horses he had bought from a neighbor. At first, she approached the animals with the same cold efficiency she had used in war, but gradually she began to soften, and sometimes Elias would catch her whispering to them in Velithari as she brushed their manes. She was changing, and so was he. The nightmares still came for both of them, but now when Elias woke screaming, he would find Kayla sitting in the hallway outside his door, and when she cried out in her sleep, he would make tea and wait for her to come to the kitchen. They never spoke much during these midnight meetings, but the silence between them had become comfortable rather than awkward. One morning, Elias found her in the living room, holding a book from his shelf with confusion on her face. "What is this?" she asked, showing him the cover. "That is a novel," he said, "a story that someone made up for entertainment." Caliph frowned at the book, as if it had insulted her. "Why would someone write a story that is not true?" she asked. "What is the purpose?" Elias laughed and sat down beside her. "The purpose is to feel things," he explained, "to imagine other lives and other worlds, and to experience emotions through the characters. Humans love stories because they help us understand ourselves." "This is very strange," Caliph said, but she did not put the book down, and later that day, Elias saw her sitting by the window, reading it with intense concentration. He taught her about music, too, playing old songs on a speaker system that had gathered dust for years. She listened with her head tilted like a curious bird, and when he played something slow and sad, she asked why humans would choose to feel sadness on purpose. "Because sadness is part of life," he told her, "and sometimes it helps to know that others have felt the same pain." She thought about this for a long time, and then she taught him something in return. She showed him the history of her people, drawing diagrams on paper, and speaking of the ancient days before the Velithari became conquerors. "We were not always this way," she said. 1,000 years ago, we were peaceful scholars and artists. Then the HFY came and enslaved us for 300 years. And when we finally broke free, we vowed to never be weak again. "So you became the thing you feared," Elias said. Caliph nodded slowly. "We became worse," she admitted. "We conquered and enslaved and destroyed because we were afraid of being conquered and enslaved and destroyed ourselves. The cruelty was born from trauma and passed down through generations until it became our identity." "That is the saddest thing I have ever heard," Elias said. "It is the truth," Caliph replied, "and truth is often sad." But their peaceful days were not meant to last. The first sign of trouble came when Elias drove into town for supplies and found the word traitor painted in red across his truck. He cleaned it off without comment, but when he returned home, he saw that Caliph had noticed the remaining streaks of paint. "You should send me away," she said quietly. "I am causing problems for you." "No," Elias replied firmly. "Whoever did this is the problem, not you." The threats escalated over the following weeks. Letters arrived filled with hatred and promises of violence. And one night, someone threw a rock through the kitchen window with a note attached that read, "Alien lovers die." Elias reported everything to the local authorities, but they seemed uninterested in helping. One deputy even told him that maybe he should think about what message he was sending by keeping an enemy soldier in his home. "I am sending the message that the war is over," Elias said coldly, "and that I will not let fear turn me into a monster." He bought a security system and installed cameras around the property, and he started keeping his old service rifle within reach at all times. Caliph watched these preparations with growing concern. "You should not have to defend yourself because of me," she said. "I am not defending myself because of you," Elias corrected her. "I am defending my home and everyone in it. That includes you." What neither of them knew was that the xenophobic humans were not the only ones watching. On a station orbiting a distant moon, a group of Velithari refugees gathered in secret. They had rejected the surrender and fled rather than submit to human rule. And now they burned with the desire to reignite the war. "The High Strategist still lives," their leader announced. "She is being held by a human soldier on the enemy homeworld." "She surrendered," one of the warriors spat. "She is a coward and a traitor." "She is a symbol," the leader countered. "If we rescue her and present her to our scattered fleets, they will rally behind her name. She planned the greatest victories of the war, and she can plan more." "And if she refuses to join us?" the warrior asked. The leader smiled coldly. "Then we kill her and blame the humans, and our people's rage will do the rest." They sent a strike team to Earth with orders to capture or eliminate Caliph Vorsan, and on the same night that team landed in Montana, the xenophobic humans decided to make their own move. Elias was woken by the alarm system, screaming, and he grabbed his rifle and ran to the hallway. Caliph was already there, her body tense and ready, her silver eyes scanning the darkness. "How many?" she asked. Elias checked his tablet, and his blood ran cold. "At least 10, he said, "coming from 2 directions. Some of them are human, but the heat signatures on the others are too tall." "Velithari," Caliph breathed, and her face went pale. They moved through the house without speaking, using hand signals that transcended the languages of their peoples. Elias took position by the front windows, while Caliph covered the back door. The first attackers came through a window, in a shower of glass. They were humans in black masks, carrying crude weapons, and Elias dropped 2 of them before they could take 3 steps. The others retreated, shouting curses and threats. But then the back door exploded inward, and Velithari warriors poured through like shadows made solid. They were faster and stronger than humans, and their blades hummed with energy that could cut through steel. Caliph met them with a fury that took Elias's breath away. She moved like water and struck like lightning, her hands and feet becoming weapons that broke bones and shattered armor. She had no weapon but her body, and it was enough. Elias fired into the chaos, careful to avoid hitting her, and together they pushed the attackers back. But there were too many, and the house was too open, and he knew they could not hold out forever. "We need to get out," he shouted. Caliph nodded, and they fought their way toward the garage where his truck was parked. She took a blade meant for his throat and deflected it with her forearm, and the energy burned her skin and made her cry out in pain. Elias shot the warrior who had hurt her, and then grabbed her arm and pulled her into the garage. They climbed into the truck, and he started the engine and crashed through the garage door into the night. Behind them the house was burning, set ablaze by the attackers, who had failed to capture their targets. Elias drove as fast as he could down the mountain road, his hands steady on the wheel, even as his heart pounded in his chest. "Let me see your arm," he said when they had put some distance between them and the fire. Caliph showed him the wound, and he winced at the sight of the blackened flesh. She needed medical attention, but he did not know who he could trust. "Why did your people come for you?" he asked. Caliph was silent for a moment, then spoke with shame in her voice. "They want to use me to restart the war," she said. "My name still carries weight among the fleets. If they could control me, they could control the remnants of our military." "And the humans?" Elias asked. "They just want me dead," Caliph said simply. "And probably you too now." Elias laughed bitterly and shook his head. "I survived 12 years of war," he said. "I am not going to let some cowards in masks finish me off." He drove through the night until they reached a small motel far from town, and he paid cash for a room and helped Caliph inside. He cleaned and bandaged her wound with supplies from a first aid kit, and she watched him work with something new in her eyes. "You fought well," she said. "So did you," he replied. "I have never seen anyone move like that." "I was trained since childhood," she explained, "but I have not fought in years. My body is not what it was." Elias finished wrapping her arm and sat back on the bed. "You took that blade for me," he said. "Why?" Caliph looked at him, and her silver eyes were soft in the dim light of the motel room. "Because you are mine," she said. "Not as master and slave, but as something I do not have words for. You showed me kindness when I deserved hatred, and you gave me a home when I had nothing. I would die before I let anyone take you from this world." Elias felt something shift in his chest, something that had been frozen for 12 years, beginning to thaw. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed with a message from a number he did not recognize. He opened it and read the words with growing dread. "Sergeant Cole, we need to talk. The war is not over, and your guest may be the key to preventing a second one. Coordinates attached. Come alone or with her, but come quickly. The fate of 2 species depends on it." He showed the message to Caliph and watched her face go pale. "I know what this is about," she whispered, "and I should have told you sooner." "Told me what?" Elias demanded. Caliph met his eyes, and he saw fear there, real fear, the kind that comes from knowing something terrible. "The Kethvor are coming," she said. "The enemy who enslaved my people 1,000 years ago. They have been watching our war and waiting for both sides to weaken, and now they are ready to strike." Elias stared at her in shock. "Why did you not tell me?" he asked. "Because I was ashamed," she admitted. "I knew they were coming. I tried to end our war quickly so we could prepare, but I failed. Everything I did, every battle I planned, every siege I designed, it was all to save both our peoples from a threat you did not even know existed." She looked down at her bandaged arm, and her voice broke. "I became a monster trying to prevent a greater monster, and in the end I saved no one." Elias reached out and took her hand, and she looked up at him with tears in her silver eyes. "Then we saved them together," he said. "You and me, Human and Velithari, we finish what you started." Caliph squeezed his hand and nodded. "Together," she agreed. Outside the motel window, the sun was beginning to rise over the mountains, and somewhere in the darkness of space, an ancient enemy was beginning to stir. The coordinates led them to an underground bunker in the Nevada desert, a place that did not appear on any map. Elias drove through the night with Caliph beside him, her wound healing slowly, thanks to Velithari biology, but still causing her pain with every bump in the road. When they arrived, they were met by soldiers in unmarked uniforms, who scanned them for weapons and led them deep into the earth. The bunker was vast, filled with screens and computers and people who looked like they had not slept in weeks. A woman with gray hair and sharp eyes stepped forward to greet them. "Sergeant Cole," she said, "I am Director Sarah Walsh of the Terran Intelligence Service." "Thank you for coming," Elias replied. Director Walsh smiled without warmth. "You always have a choice," she said, "but I am glad you chose to help." She led them to a briefing room where other officers were gathered around a holographic display showing a star map. Red dots were clustered near the edge of known space, and they were growing closer with each passing moment. "This is what we know," Director Walsh began. 3 weeks ago, our deep space sensors detected a fleet emerging from unexplored territory. The ships do not match any design in our database, but your friend here recognized them immediately. She looked at Caliph with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. "Perhaps you would like to explain." Caliph stepped forward, and her voice was steady despite the fear Elias could see in her eyes. "They are HFY," she said, "a parasitic hive mind species that conquered my people 1,000 years ago. They do not simply defeat their enemies, they absorb them. Every species they consume adds to their collective intelligence and their fleet." The officers muttered among themselves, and Director Walsh raised a hand for silence. "How do you know this?" she asked. "Because I have been tracking them for 20 years, Caliph admitted. "My entire military career was shaped by the knowledge that they were still out there, waiting for an opportunity to return. I rose through the ranks not for glory or power, but because I needed to be in a position to prepare my people for the war that was coming." "Then why did you attack us?" one of the officers demanded. "Why start a war with humanity when you knew a greater threat was approaching?" Caliph's jaw tightened, and she looked at the floor. "Because we needed to end the war quickly," she said. "They watch from the shadows and wait for civilizations to exhaust themselves in conflict before striking. I believed that if we could defeat humanity fast enough, we could unite both species against the true enemy." "By slaughtering our people," the officer spat. "Yes," Caliph said quietly. "I made terrible choices, and I carry the weight of every death. But I was trying to save everyone, human and Velithari alike, from something far worse than anything I did." Director Walsh studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I believe you," she said, "not because I trust you, but because the evidence supports your story. We have analyzed the approaching fleet, and the ships match ancient Velithari records of HFY vessels." She turned back to the display and zoomed in on a moon orbiting a gas giant in Velithari space. "This is the sacred moon of Veltora," she continued. "According to intelligence obtained from Velithari prisoners, there is an ancient weapon hidden there that was used to defeat the HFY the first time. It can disrupt their hive mind and render them vulnerable." "Then we use it," Elias said. "It is not that simple," Caliph replied. "The weapon requires a Velithari of noble blood to activate it, and most of my people will not trust humans enough to cooperate. They would rather die fighting alone than accept help from their former enemy." "Then you convince them," Director Walsh said. Caliph shook her head. "I am a traitor in their eyes. The shame brands on my skin mark me as conquered. They will kill me before they listen to anything I have to say." The room fell silent, and Elias felt the weight of impossible odds pressing down on him. But he had faced impossible odds before, and he was still standing. "I will go with her," he said. Director Walsh raised an eyebrow. "You would enter hostile territory with only a disgraced Velithari for protection?" she asked. "She is not just a disgraced Velithari," Elias replied. "She is the greatest strategist your species has ever faced, and she knows how to reach her people in ways that diplomats and soldiers never could. If anyone can convince them to fight alongside us, it is her." He looked at Caliph and saw surprise and gratitude in her silver eyes. "Besides," he added with a grim smile, "someone has to watch her back." The mission launched 3 days later, with a small team of human special forces and Velithari defectors who had agreed to cooperate. Elias led the human contingent, while Caliph served as guide and translator. The journey through Velithari space was tense. They passed burned worlds and shattered stations, evidence of a civilization that had been torn apart by war and surrender. Caliph watched it all, with pain in her eyes, and said nothing. When they reached the sacred moon, they found it guarded by a Velithari resistance force that refused to recognize the surrender. Their ships were old and damaged, but their warriors were fierce, and they opened fire the moment they detected the human vessels. "Let me speak to them," Caliph said. Elias ordered the fleet to hold position and opened a communication channel. Caliph stepped in front of the camera and spoke in rapid Velithari, her voice carrying an authority that surprised him. The response came in angry shouts and threats, but Caliph did not back down. She spoke of the HFY and the ancient enemy returning, and she spoke of the weapon hidden on the moon and the need to use it before it was too late. Finally, a face appeared on the screen, an old Velithari warrior with scars covering half his face and eyes that burned with hatred. "You wear the shame brands," he said in heavily accented English. "You surrendered to humans, and now you bring them to our sacred place. Give me one reason not to destroy you." Caliph pulled back her sleeve and showed him her branded arm. "I wear these marks because I tried to save our people," she said. "I fought harder and sacrificed more than any warrior in this fleet. I lost everything because I knew what was coming, and no one would listen." She pointed toward the stars. "The HFY are coming," she continued, "not in 100 years or 1,000 years, but now. Their fleet will arrive in weeks, and they will do to us what they did to our ancestors. They will absorb our minds and our bodies, and everything we are will be lost." The old warrior stared at her, and his expression flickered with something like fear. "You speak of ancient nightmares," he said. "I speak of truth," Caliph replied, "and the only way to survive is to use the weapon your ancestors created. Let us land, let us work together, or we all die." The silence stretched for an eternity, and then the old warrior nodded slowly. "Land," he said, "but know this, if you betray us, I will kill you with my own hands." They landed on the sacred moon, and were greeted by suspicious warriors, who watched their every move. The temple that housed the weapon was ancient, carved from black stone, and covered in symbols that seemed to shift and move in the torchlight. As they descended into the depths, the Velithari soldiers were surprised by the behavior of the humans. Elias's team joked with each other even in the face of danger, finding dark humor in their situation that baffled the alien warriors. "Why do they laugh?" one Velithari asked Caliph. "Because they are human," she replied. "They face death by refusing to let it steal their joy." Another warrior watched as a human soldier improvised a solution to a collapsed tunnel, using explosives and debris in a way that no Velithari would have considered. "Their tactics make no sense," the warrior said. "They do not follow protocol." Caliph smiled slightly. "That is why they defeated us," she said. "They do not fight the way they are supposed to. They fight the way they need to." The old commander who had threatened to kill her approached Elias as they neared the weapon chamber. "You are different from what I expected," he said grudgingly. "So are you," Elias replied. "I expected to be dead by now." The commander laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the stone tunnels. "Perhaps there is hope for our species yet," he said. "No wonder you defeated us. You fight like you have already accepted death, but forgotten to stop living." They reached the weapon chamber, and found a vast machine built into the heart of the moon. It hummed with power that made the air vibrate and the ground tremble beneath their feet. Caliph approached it slowly, and placed her hand on the central console. Symbols lit up beneath her touch, and she closed her eyes. "I can activate it," she said, "but there is a cost." "What cost?" Elias asked. She turned to face him, and her silver eyes were filled with sorrow. The weapon requires a life, she said, a noble Velithari soul, to power the machine. I always knew this, Elias. I knew from the moment I agreed to come. The chamber fell silent, as the weight of her words sank in. You plan to die, Elias said, and his voice was barely above a whisper. I plan to finally do something right, Calith replied. All my life, I tried to save my people, and I failed at every turn. This is my chance to make it mean something. She stepped toward the machine, and Elias felt his heart breaking in ways he did not know were possible. No, he said, there has to be another way. Calith smiled at him, with tears running down her violet cheeks. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. She turned to face the machine and raised her hands. And in that moment, Elias made a decision that would change everything. Elias grabbed Calith's arm and pulled her back from the machine. She turned to him with shock and anger in her silver eyes. What are you doing? She demanded. This is the only way. No, it is not, Elias said, and his mind was racing through possibilities that no one else would consider. You said the machine needs a soul to power it, but you did not say it has to be just one soul. Calith stared at him without understanding. Human neural linking technology, Elias continued. We developed it during the war for combat coordination. Two minds connected through electronic interfaces, sharing thoughts and reactions. It is dangerous and barely tested, but if I connect to the machine alongside you, we might be able to share the load. That is insane, Calith said. You are not Velithari. The machine might reject you. Or worse, it might tear your mind apart. Then we die together, Elias replied, but at least we try. The old Velithari commander stepped forward, with disbelief on his scarred face. You would risk your life for one of us? He asked, after everything we did in the war? Elias looked at him and shrugged. She spent 12 years trying to save everyone by herself, he said. Maybe it is time someone helped her. He turned back to Calith and took both her hands in his. I am not going to stand here and watch you die, he said. Not when there is even the smallest chance I can save you. You showed me that the war did not have to define who I am, and I am choosing to be someone who does not give up on the people he cares about. Calith's silver eyes searched his face, and she saw something there that made her breath catch. Why? She whispered. Why do you care so much about me? Because you taught me how to feel again, Elias said simply. Because you looked at me when I was broken and saw someone worth saving. Because for the first time in 12 years, I have something to live for. Tears streamed down her violet cheeks, and she laughed through them, a sound that was both joy and grief. Humans are truly the strangest species in the galaxy, she said. Maybe, Elias agreed, but we are also the most stubborn. The technical team worked quickly to rig the neural interface, connecting Elias to the ancient Velithari machine through a web of wires and electrodes. The old commander watched, with something that might have been respect. And even the warriors who had wanted to kill them seemed moved by what was happening. If this works, the commander said, we will speak of this day for 1,000 years. If this works, Elias replied, we will be alive to hear it. Calith took her place beside him and connected to the machine through its original interface. She reached out and took his hand, and when she squeezed it, he felt her fear and her hope and her desperate love all at once. Ready? She asked. No, he admitted, but let us do it anyway. They activated the machine together. The universe exploded into light. Elias felt his mind expanding beyond the limits of his skull, pouring into the machine like water into an ocean. Beside him, Calith's consciousness blazed like a violet sun, and for one transcendent moment, their thoughts merged into something neither of them had ever experienced. He felt her memories washing over him like waves on a shore. A childhood of harsh training and impossible expectations. the weight of command pressing down on her shoulders, the guilt of every death she had ordered. He felt her loneliness, deep and ancient, the isolation of a woman who had carried the fate of her people alone for so long. And she felt his memories in return, the warmth of his mother's kitchen on winter mornings, the laughter of friends who would never come home, the frozen bunker on Europa, where he had held a dying soldier and promised to make the enemy pay. She felt his stubborn hope, the part of him that refused to surrender, even when surrender was the only logical option. They understood each other completely in that moment. All barriers stripped away, two souls laid bare before the ancient machine. And then the power surged through them. It was agony and ecstasy beyond description. The machine drank their combined life force and channeled it into a beam of energy that shot out into space, invisible to the eye, but devastating to the hive mind of the HFY. Across the galaxy, the approaching fleet screamed as one. Their ships veered off course and crashed into each other as the network that connected them shattered like glass. The parasitic consciousness that had enslaved worlds and consumed species suddenly found itself fractured into a million pieces, each fragment confused and afraid. The HFY were not destroyed, but they were broken. They would not threaten anyone for a very long time. In the weapon chamber, Elias and Caliph collapsed together, their hands still intertwined. The machine powered down around them, and the lights faded until only the glow of emergency torches remained. The old commander rushed to their side and checked for vital signs. "They live," he announced, and his voice was thick with emotion. "By the ancestors, they live." The chamber erupted in cheers from both human and Velithari soldiers, a sound that no one had ever expected to hear. Enemies who had spent 12 years killing each other now embraced and wept with relief. Caliph opened her silver eyes slowly and found Elias looking at her. "We did it," she whispered. "We did it together," he corrected. She reached up and touched his face, and he felt the echo of her emotions through a connection that the machine had left behind. They could sense each other now, a permanent bond that neither of them fully understood. "I can feel you," she said with wonder. "In my mind, in my heart. You are part of me now." "And you are part of me," Elias replied. "Is that okay?" Caliph smiled, and it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "It is more than okay," she said. "It is everything I never knew I wanted." The news of their victory spread quickly through both species. Human and Velithari soldiers watched in shock as footage emerged of the two former enemies fighting side by side against the retreating HFY. The war that had divided them suddenly seemed small compared to the threat they had faced together. Peace talks began within days. Real peace talks this time, not the grudging surrender that had come before. Caliph was invited to speak to the Velithari Council, her shame brands now marks of honor rather than disgrace. "She saved us all," the old commander told the council, "she and the human soldier together. They showed us that strength does not require cruelty, and that courage can come from compassion as well as fury." The council voted to remove the Valkarath tradition of conquest and replace it with a new bond, one based on choice rather than defeat. Caliph wept when she heard the news, and Elias held her through the tears. Months later, they returned to Montana, to the ranch that had been destroyed by fire and hatred. But where the old house had stood, a new one was rising, built by volunteers from both species who wanted to honor the heroes who had saved them. "It is strange," Caliph said as she watched a Velithari worker carrying lumber alongside a human carpenter. "A year ago we were enemies, and now we build together." "That is what happens when you stop fighting and start listening," Elias replied. She turned to look at him with those silver eyes that he had grown to love. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Taking me in when you could have sent me away?" Elias thought about everything that had happened, the fear and the anger, the danger and the death, the impossible odds they had overcome. He thought about the nightmares that still came, but no longer haunted him, and the woman beside him who had changed his life in ways he never expected. "No," he said, "I do not regret a single moment." The new house was finished in the spring, and they moved in together with a sense of hope that neither of them had felt in years. Caliph planted a garden with seeds from both worlds, Velithari flowers growing beside human vegetables, and she tended it with the same care she had once used to plan battles. One evening, Elias found her standing in the garden as the sun set behind the mountains. She was watching the sky where distant stars were beginning to appear, and her face was peaceful in a way he had never seen during the war. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "I am thinking about how wrong I was," she replied. "I spent my whole life believing that survival required strength, and that strength required cruelty. I thought compassion was weakness, and kindness was a luxury we could not afford." She turned to face him, and her silver eyes were bright with unshed tears. "But you showed me another way," she continued. "You showed me that the greatest strength is choosing not to hate, and the greatest courage is opening your heart to someone who has every reason to hurt you." Elias stepped closer and took her hands. "You showed me things too," he said. "You showed me that enemies are not born, they are made, and that anyone can change if they are given the chance. You showed me that carrying pain alone only makes it heavier, and that sharing it can set you free." They stood together in the fading light, human and Velithari, soldier and strategist, two broken people who had found healing in each other. "What do humans call this feeling?" Caliph asked softly. "When the chains are gone, but you choose to stay. When you are free to leave, but you never want to. When another person becomes your home." Elias smiled and pulled her close. "We call it love," he said. She rested her head against his chest, and he felt her joy through the bond they shared, a warmth that spread through him like sunlight after a long winter. "Then I love you, Elias Cole," she whispered. "And I love you, Caliph Vorsan," he replied. Above them the stars sparkled in the darkening sky, witnesses to a miracle that no one had thought possible. Two enemies who had become partners, two wounded souls who had found peace, two species who had learned that the strongest bond is forged not through conquest, but through compassion. Elias had been given an alien woman as a war prize, and what he had not expected was everything. He had not expected her pain, or her secrets, or the hidden war she had been fighting alone. He had not expected to care about her, to risk his life for her, to link his mind with hers in a desperate gamble. He had not expected to find in his former enemy the partner he had always needed, and he had not expected that in setting her free, he would finally free himself. The war was over, truly over now, and a new chapter was beginning. Not just for them, but for both their species, a future built on trust instead of fear, on hope instead of hatred. And it had all started with a simple act of kindness, a soldier removing the chains from a prisoner and saying the words that changed everything. "I do not own people, you are free to go." She had stayed anyway, and that had made all the difference. In the garden of their home on Earth, human and Velithari flowers bloomed together in the starlight, and two hearts that had been broken by war finally found the peace they had been searching for. This was not the ending anyone had expected. It was something far better.